They stopped recording in 1947, not because the equipment failed, not because funding dried up. They stopped because someone finally listened to what was on the tapes. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. You can't go back to pretending that silence is empty. In the spring of 2019, a storage unit in Duluth, Minnesota was auctioned off after 30 years of unpaid rent. The buyer, a local antique dealer named Marcus Webb, expected furniture, maybe some old photographs. What he found instead were 17 reel-to-reel tape boxes, each one labeled with dates, coordinates, and a single word, Ravenshore. Inside those boxes were voices, hundreds of them. But here's what made Marcus call the police that same afternoon. Every single voice on those tapes belonged to someone who had been declared dead at least 2 years before the recording date. Ravenshore isn't on any modern map. It was a company town in northern Wisconsin, built in 1889 around a lumber mill that employed nearly 400 men. The town thrived for 50 years, survived the Depression, sent its sons to 2 world wars. Then, in 1944, something changed. The mill didn't close, the population didn't leave, but the town started dying anyway. Not all at once, slowly, like watching a photograph fade in reverse. The recordings were made by Dr. Evelyn Marsh, a psychologist contracted by the mill's parent company to investigate what they called reduced worker efficiency. That's corporate speak for what the foremen were actually reporting: men showing up to shifts who'd been buried weeks earlier, wives cooking dinner for husbands whose funeral they'd attended, children playing with siblings the whole town had mourned, and everyone in Ravenshore pretending it was normal. Pretending they didn't see what was happening. Because once you acknowledge it, once you say it out loud, you have to face what it means. Dr. Marsh's assignment was simple: document the phenomenon. Determine if it was mass hysteria, shared delusion, or something environmental. She set up her equipment in the town's only church basement. She conducted interviews. She recorded everything. And in those recordings, preserved on magnetic tape for 75 years, you can hear her slowly realize that some doors once opened don't close. Some questions shouldn't be answered, and some places hold on to their dead because the living won't let them go. Hello everyone, before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. The first tape is dated November 12, 1944. Dr. Marsh's voice is calm, clinical, exactly what you'd expect from someone with a doctorate from the University of Chicago. She's interviewing a mill foreman named Thomas Hendricks. He sounds tired. Not the exhaustion of a long shift, but something deeper. The wariness of a man who's been carrying a secret that's gotten too heavy to hold alone. Hendricks tells her about Carl Novak, good worker, 42 years old, married, 3 children, died of pneumonia on October 3, 1944. The whole town attended the funeral. His wife, Anna, threw herself on the casket, had to be pulled away by her brothers. They buried Carl in the town cemetery, plot 73, beside his father. 2 weeks later, Carl Novak showed up for his morning shift at the mill. Same blue work shirt, same lunch pail, same thermos of coffee his wife made him every morning since 1925. Now here's what makes your skin crawl. Hendricks doesn't sound surprised telling this story. He sounds resigned. He explains that Carl worked his full shift, operated the same saw he'd run for 18 years. Didn't speak much, but then again, Carl never had. At the end of the day, Carl walked home. Anna made him dinner. The children set his place at the table. And nobody said a word about the funeral. Nobody mentioned the grave. Because in Ravenshore, by November 1944, this wasn't an anomaly anymore. It was becoming routine. Dr. Marsh asks the obvious question. Did you check the grave? Hendricks goes quiet for almost 30 seconds. The tape keeps running, capturing his breathing, the creak of his chair. Finally, he says yes. They checked. The grave was undisturbed. The casket was still sealed. The body was still inside. He doesn't elaborate on how he knows this, but you can hear it in his voice. He saw something that confirmed it, something he doesn't want to describe. She asks him how many others there are, how many of Ravenshore's dead have come back to their lives. Hendricks tells her he's stopped counting, but he estimates at least 40, maybe more. Some families don't report it anymore, they just accept it. Make room at the table, wash the extra set of clothes, pretend that death is negotiable in Ravenshore, that the boundary between gone and here can be crossed without consequence. But there's always a consequence. Hendricks knows this. You can hear it in the way his voice drops when Dr. Marsh ends the interview. He says something so quietly, the tape barely captures it. They're not the same. They look the same, but something's missing, something they left behind. By December 1944, Dr. Marsh had interviewed 23 residents of Ravenshore. The tapes reveal a pattern that's more disturbing than any single incident. This wasn't mass hysteria. It wasn't grief-induced hallucination. Everyone was seeing the same people, interacting with them, working alongside them. And what's worse, the returned weren't confused or disoriented. They simply continued their lives as if death had been nothing more than a brief interruption. Tape 7 contains an interview with Anna Novak, Carl's widow. Except she doesn't call herself a widow anymore. She speaks about Carl in the present tense. He still drinks his coffee at 5 in the morning, still reads the newspaper at the kitchen table, still kisses her forehead before leaving for the mill. Dr. Marsh presses her gently. Does Carl speak about what happened? Does he remember dying? Anna's answer is chilling in its simplicity. He doesn't remember because it didn't happen. My husband is alive. He's here. Whatever we buried in October, it wasn't him. This is the psychological fracture that runs through every interview. The people of Ravenshore have rewritten their reality to accommodate the impossible. They've created a collective narrative where death is a mistake that can be corrected. Where the dead returning isn't a horror, it's a blessing. A second chance. But Dr. Marsh notices something the residents either can't see or refuse to acknowledge. The returned don't eat. They go through the motions, sitting at tables, raising forks to mouths, but the food remains untouched. They don't sleep. Families report them sitting in chairs throughout the night, motionless, eyes open, waiting for morning. On tape 9, Dr. Marsh interviews the town doctor, Samuel Whitmore. He's 70 years old, been practicing in Ravenshore since 1902. He sounds broken, not physically but spiritually. He tells Dr. Marsh he's examined 12 of the returned, checked their pulses, listened to their hearts, drawn their blood. The results are impossible. No heartbeat, no respiration, body temperature 20 degrees below normal. The blood he drew wouldn't clot. It sat in the vials, dark and still, like something that had already given up on life. And yet these people walk. They talk. They perform their daily routines with mechanical precision. Dr. Whitmore shares something else. Something that makes the recordings feel less like documentation and more like evidence. He says the returned are changing the living. Families who accept them back start exhibiting the same signs. Lower body temperatures, decreased appetite, a kind of emotional flattening. As if the returned are somehow equalizing the space between life and death, pulling their loved ones toward that middle ground, making them less alive so they can meet halfway. He tells Dr. Marsh that he's scared, not of the return, but of what Ravenshore is becoming. A town that's forgotten how to let go. A place where grief has taken physical form and nobody has the courage to face what they've created. Tape 12 is where Dr. Marsh's clinical detachment begins to crack. She's interviewing Margaret Holloway, a schoolteacher who's been in Ravenshore for 16 years. Margaret is 34 years old, unmarried, and according to her own words, one of the few people in town still willing to acknowledge that something is fundamentally wrong. She tells Dr. Marsh about the children. There are 8 children in Ravenshore who died between 1942 and 1944. Scarlet fever, influenza, 1 drowning, 2 in a house fire. All of them returned. All of them came back to school. Margaret describes what it's like teaching a classroom where 3 of the students have no pulse. Where little Susan Dietrich sits at her desk, the same desk she sat at before the fever took her, and methodically copies her lessons without ever making a mistake. Never asks a question. Never smiles. Just performs the act of being a student with perfect, hollow precision. The other children know something's wrong. Margaret explains that the living children have stopped playing with the returned ones. Not out of cruelty, but instinct. Something primal tells them to keep their distance. But the parents don't see it, or won't see it. They pack lunches for their dead children. They help them with homework. They maintain the pretense so fiercely that Margaret has received complaints from parents asking why she treats certain students differently. They accuse her of being cold to their children, of not giving them the attention they deserve. She tried once to explain that their children aren't children anymore, that what sits in those desks is something wearing their shape. She was nearly run out of town for it. Dr. Marsh asks Margaret why she stays. Why not leave Ravenshore if she can see what others refuse to? Margaret's answer reveals something crucial about what's happening. She says she tried to leave 3 times. Each time, she made it as far as the town limits, about 2 miles north on the main road. And each time, she found herself turning around. Not because she wanted to. Not because she forgot something. But because something made her. She describes it as a pressure in her mind, a compulsion that felt external, like invisible hands turning her around and guiding her back. Other people have tried to leave too. All of them came back. Ravenshore isn't just keeping its dead. It's keeping everyone. Dr. Marsh's voice wavers for the first time when she asks the next question. You can hear her breathing change, faster, shallower. She asks Margaret if she believes Ravenshore will let Dr. Marsh leave when her research is finished. There's a long pause. Then Margaret says something that makes the temperature in the room feel like it dropped. Dr. Marsh, you've been recording us for 4 weeks now. You've documented everything. You've collected evidence. But have you noticed? You haven't tried to leave yet. You haven't even called your university to update them on your progress. It's already started with you too. The town is already holding on. The recordings from January 1945 take on a different quality. Dr. Marsh's voice has changed. The clinical precision is still there, but underneath it there's something else. Fear, real, creeping fear that she's documenting her own trap. She begins leaving notes on the tapes, verbal annotations that feel less like research observations and more like messages to whoever might find them. She knows she's running out of time. Tape 14 contains the most disturbing interview in the entire collection. Dr. Marsh speaks with Harold Graves, the owner of Ravenshore's only funeral home. Harold is 68 years old and has buried every person who's died in Ravenshore since 1919. He tells Dr. Marsh that he stopped embalming bodies in 1943. There was no point. Within days, sometimes hours, the deceased would return. The families would come back to reclaim them. Not the bodies, but the people themselves, walking and talking and insisting they'd never died at all. Harold describes the impossible position this put him in. What do you do when the person you're preparing for burial sits up and asks what's happening? When they have no memory of dying, no awareness that anything is wrong. But here's what Harold tells her that changes everything. The dead aren't returning randomly. There's a pattern. It started with the oldest graves, people who'd been dead for years. The cemetery began in 1889 when Ravenshore was founded. In late 1943, the graves from 1889 and 1890 started showing disturbances, not obvious at first, just subtle signs, shifted earth, disturbed markers. Then, one by one, people began reporting encounters with relatives who'd been dead for over 50 years, great-grandparents showing up at family dinners, founders of the town seen walking the streets at night. And with each wave of returns, the phenomenon accelerated. By 1944, it wasn't just the long dead anymore. It was recent deaths. People buried weeks, even days ago. Harold shares his theory. He believes Ravenshore is full. That's the word he uses, full. He thinks the town has absorbed so much death over 5 years that it can't hold any more. That the boundary between the living world and whatever comes after has worn thin here, eroded by grief and refusal to let go. Every funeral, every burial, every tear shed over a grave has fed something. And now that something is pushing back, returning what was given to it because there's no more room. The dead are coming back because they have nowhere else to go. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? If your family was buried in Ravenshore, would you dig up the graves to prove they're still there? Or would you accept the returned and pretend nothing is wrong? Because by January 1945, that's the choice every family in Ravenshore had made. Accept or acknowledge. And acknowledgement meant facing something no one was prepared to face. Tape 16 is dated March 3, 1945. Dr. Marsh is no longer conducting interviews. She's talking to herself, recording her own observations because there's no one left she trusts to tell the truth. She describes what's happening to her, the changes she can feel but can't stop. She's been in Ravenshore for 4 months now. She hasn't left the town limits once, hasn't tried. The thought of leaving feels foreign, like a language she used to speak but has forgotten. She checks her body temperature every morning. It's dropping, slowly. 97 degrees, then 96. She's down to 94.2. She still eats, but food has stopped tasting like anything. It's mechanical. Fuel for a body that's forgetting what it means to be alive. She talks about dreams she's been having. In them, she's standing in the Ravenshore cemetery at night. All the graves are open, empty, and the town behind her is full of people. Hundreds of them, more than Ravenshore's population could ever support. They're standing in the streets, in the yards, in the windows of every house. All of them silent, all of them watching her. And in the dream, she understands. They're waiting, not for her to leave, but for her to join them. To stop resisting, to accept that Ravenshore doesn't let go of anyone who stays too long. Dr. Marsh reveals something crucial on this tape. She's discovered why the phenomenon started when it did. She found town records, old ledgers from the mill's early days. In 1889, when Ravenshore was founded, there was an agreement. The mill's parent company purchased the land from the federal government. But there was a condition. The land had been used by indigenous peoples as a burial ground for centuries before white settlement. The company was required to relocate any discovered remains before construction. They didn't. They built over them, poured foundations directly on top of ancestral graves. The mill, the church, the town hall, all of it constructed on disturbed sacred ground. For 50 years, Ravenshore's dead were buried on top of older dead, layer after layer, and something underneath finally pushed back. She theorizes that 1943 was the tipping point, the year when the weight of Ravenshore's accumulated grief exceeded whatever boundary existed, when the living's refusal to let their dead go created enough spiritual pressure that the barrier collapsed. What returned wasn't resurrection. It was echo. Imprints of people, worn smooth by their families' desperate need to keep them close. And those echoes were pulling the living toward them, equalizing the space, making everyone in Ravenshore exist in that gray space between life and death. Dr. Marsh knows she's becoming one of them. She can feel it. The way time feels different now, the way her own memories are starting to feel distant and unreal, like something that happened to someone else. The final tape is dated April 19th, 1947. There's a 2-year gap in the recordings. No explanation for the silence. When Dr. Marsh's voice returns, it's different, flatter, emotionless. The cadence is wrong, like someone reading from a script they don't fully understand. She speaks for 11 minutes. No pauses, no hesitation. Just a steady stream of information delivered in a voice that might have once belonged to Evelyn Marsh but doesn't anymore. She reports that Ravenshore's population has stabilized. 473 people. Except that number doesn't account for deaths. The town records show 112 deaths between 1944 and 1947. But the population hasn't decreased, it's increased. Because everyone who dies stays, and everyone who stays eventually stops being entirely alive. The town has achieved a kind of equilibrium, a place where the distinction between living and dead no longer matters, because everyone exists in the same liminal state. She describes it as peaceful. That word, peaceful, delivered in that hollow voice, is more terrifying than anything else on the tapes. Dr. Marsh explains that she's finishing her report, documenting her findings. She'll seal the tapes and arrange for their storage. She speaks about this as if it's a routine academic task, but there's something desperate underneath the monotone, a last grasp at purpose, at remembering why she came here. She says the tapes need to be preserved because someone should know what happened. Someone outside Ravenshore should understand that there are places in America where death stopped working the way it's supposed to, where grief became a physical force strong enough to break reality. Then, in the final 2 minutes of the last tape, something breaks through. Dr. Marsh's voice cracks. The clinical detachment shatters, and what emerges is pure, raw terror. She's whispering now, speaking fast, like she's afraid someone will hear her. She says she doesn't know if she's alive anymore. She can't remember when she last felt truly awake. She looks in mirrors and doesn't recognize what looks back. She goes through her days and can't tell if she's making choices or following a script written by something else. She says if anyone finds these tapes, they need to understand Ravenshore isn't holding its dead. It's becoming them. The whole town is transforming into an echo of itself, and she's part of that now. She's one more voice in a chorus of people who forgot how to leave. The tape ends abruptly, mid-sentence. Like someone pulled the plug, or Dr. Marsh simply stopped existing in that moment. In 2019, when Marcus Webb found these recordings, he did what anyone would do. He searched for Dr. Evelyn Marsh, found her records, University of Chicago, doctorate in psychology, 1941. Contracted by Northwoods Timber Company in 1954, and then nothing, no death certificate, no further publications, no records of her after April 1947. He searched for Ravenshore next, found a defunct lumber mill, coordinates that lead to empty forest in northern Wisconsin. No town, no buildings, no cemetery, just trees and silence and earth that feels wrong when you stand on it, like something underneath is still waiting, still holding on. The 17 tapes are all that prove Ravenshore ever existed, voices without bodies. Echoes without sources, a town that died so slowly no one noticed until everyone was gone.